There is a prayer you have prayed so many times that the words have worn smooth in your mouth. Like a stone carried in a pocket for years, you have lost count of how often you have lifted it up. This one deep request, the thing you have longed for and pleaded for and waited on for so long that you can no longer remember a time when you were not waiting. Maybe it is a person you have been praying home for years. Maybe it is a healing that has not come, a child you have ached for, a door that has not opened, a change in someone you love, a calling that keeps not arriving. And the hardest part is not the wanting. You could bear the wanting. The hardest part is the silence. The years of asking and waiting and watching the calendar turn, season into season, and hearing, it seems, nothing in return. The prayer goes up, and the days go by, and the thing you are waiting for does not come. And slowly a question begins to form in the quiet. Is anyone hearing this? Has God forgotten? Will the answer ever come? Or have I been waiting all this time for nothing? If that is where you are tonight, worn thin by a long wait, praying a prayer that has gone unanswered for so long that hope itself has begun to feel foolish, then I want to sit with you for this hour. Not to tell you that your answer is arriving tomorrow, because I cannot see your future, and I will not invent a promise God has not made, but to sit with you honestly in the long wait, and to tell you what God says to those who have waited a very long time, and to remind you, through real lives, that a delay from God is not the same as a denial, that the silence is not absence, and that the God you have been waiting on has a long and faithful history of keeping His promises, though often not on the schedule we would have chosen. So stay with me. Let me sit with you in the waiting. And let me say at the start what I am not going to do, so you can trust me through the rest of this hour. I am not going to promise you that if you just believe hard enough, or pray the right words, or wait with enough faith, your answer will finally appear. Because that is not how God works, and it would lay on you the cruel burden of thinking your wait is your own fault. And I am not going to tell you to stop wanting the thing, to just let it go and be at peace, because the longing is real, and God Himself put many of these longings in you. What I will do is tell you the truth about waiting, the honest, hard, hopeful truth, that God is faithful, that His delays are not His denials, that He is at work in the silence, and that the deepest thing you need in the long wait is not a guaranteed date for your answer, but a renewed grip on the one who holds both you and the answer in His hands. That is a hope that can hold you steady whether your answer comes tomorrow, or comes in a way you never expected, or comes only on the far side of this life. And it is the only kind of hope strong enough to carry a person through a wait that has no end in sight. Let me begin by naming what this long wait is like, because it is one of the loneliest and least understood of all the hard things. It is the worn groove of the same prayer, repeated until you wonder if there is any point. In the beginning, you prayed it with fire, with expectation, certain the answer was near. But the years passed, and the fire cooled, and now you pray it more out of habit and stubbornness than hope, the words coming automatically, almost wearily, and you catch yourself wondering whether God has grown as tired of hearing it as you have grown of saying it. There is a particular exhaustion in praying for the same thing for years, a fatigue of the soul, and if you have felt it, the weariness of a hope you can barely keep lifting, you are not faithless. You are tired, in the way that only a long wait can make a person tired. And there is a strange guilt that often rides alongside that weariness, a sense that a stronger believer would not be so tired, would not have to drag the prayer up the hill each time, would still be praying with the bright expectation they had at the start. You compare yourself to who you used to be, back when the hope was fresh, and you feel that your weariness is a kind of failure, that you are letting God down by being so worn out. Let that guilt go. Even the strongest faith grows tired under a long enough wait. Weariness is not unbelief. It is simply the natural cost of carrying a heavy hope for a long time. God is not disappointed in you for being tired. He knows exactly how long you have carried this, and how heavy it has become. And He looks on your exhaustion not with displeasure, but with the tenderness of a father watching a child who has walked a very long way and is footsore and weary. Your tiredness does not make Him love you less, and it does not make your prayer count for less. It only means you have been faithful for a long time in a hard thing, and that is not a failure. That is endurance. It is the calendar that keeps turning, marking the anniversaries of your unanswered request. Another birthday with the chair still empty. Another year ends, and the thing you prayed would happen this year did not happen this year either. The seasons come around again with their reminders, the holidays that ache, the dates that mark how long you have been waiting. And each turning of the calendar adds another layer to the wait, another year filed under still waiting, still hoping, still nothing. Time, which is supposed to heal, can in a long wait become its own kind of wound. Each passing month a quiet accusation that what you asked for is not coming. And there is the particular ache of watching the window seem to close, of feeling that time itself is running against you, that with each passing year the thing you are waiting for becomes not only delayed, but less and less possible. The one waiting to become a parent watches the years go by and feels the door narrowing. The one praying for a relationship watches the seasons pass and wonders if the chance is gone. The one longing for a healing or a restoration feels the sand running out of the glass. There is a special torment in waiting not just long, but against a clock, in fearing that the delay will stretch past the point where the answer could even come. But hear this and hold it. The God you are waiting on is not bound by the clocks and the windows that frame your sense of what is possible. He gave Abraham and Sarah a child decades past the age when it could happen, precisely to show that His promises are not governed by what is naturally possible or by the windows that close for everyone else. With Him, it is never simply too late in the way it would be with anyone else, because He is the author of time, not its prisoner. And the question is never whether enough time remains, but only whether anything is too hard for the Lord. And nothing is. It is the slow sickness of hope deferred. The Scriptures say it plainly, that hope deferred makes the heart sick. And it is true, there is a real ache that comes from hoping for something that keeps not arriving, a heart sickness that settles in when you have gotten your hopes up and had them disappointed too many times to count. And so you grow afraid to hope, because hope has become dangerous, because every time you let yourself believe the answer might be near and it is not, the fall hurts worse than before. You begin to guard your heart, to expect nothing, to numb the longing, because the hoping itself has started to feel like more than you can survive. That is not a failure of faith. That is the wound that a long deferral leaves. And there is a cruel double bind in it that you may know well. If you let yourself hope, you risk the crushing disappointment again, the fall that gets worse each time. But if you protect yourself by giving up hope, You feel as though you are betraying the very thing you have prayed for, abandoning the person or the dream you love, and a different kind of grief sets in, the grief of a hope laid down. So you are caught between two pains, the pain of hoping and the pain of not hoping, and there seems to be no safe place to stand. If that is where you are, exhausted by the impossible choice between hoping and self-protection, hear this gently. There is a third way, and it is to move your hope off the timing and the outcome you cannot control and onto the God you can trust. You do not have to keep forcing yourself to believe the answer is coming tomorrow, and you do not have to give up and declare it dead. You can hold the specific thing with an open hand, neither clutching nor releasing it, and hold tightly instead to the faithfulness of God, who will do what is good in His time. That is a hope that does not have to be re-crushed every time the answer delays, because it rests not on the gift, but on the giver, who has never failed you and never will. It is watching others receive the very thing you are waiting for. The friend who announces the pregnancy you have prayed years for. The acquaintance whose prodigal came home, whose marriage was healed, whose prayer was answered quickly, while yours goes on unanswered. And you are glad for them. You truly are. And yet there is a private ache in it, a quiet, "Why them and not me?" that you would never say aloud. The loneliness of watching others cross the finish line you are still so far from, and wondering what is different about you, about your prayer, about your situation, that the answer comes for them and not for you. And the comparison can sour into something you are ashamed of, a flicker of resentment or envy toward people you genuinely love, and then guilt for feeling it, until you are carrying not only the original ache, but a layer of shame on top of it for not being purely happy for them. Let me speak gently to that shame. The ache you feel when someone else receives what you are still waiting for is not wickedness. It is the natural cry of a wound being pressed. It does not mean you are a bad or envious person. It means you are a hurting person whose deepest longing keeps getting reflected back to you in someone else's joy. God understands that ache completely, and He does not condemn you for it. You can bring even that to Him, the tangled mix of genuine gladness for your friend and genuine grief for yourself, and He will not be shocked or disappointed. He will simply hold you in it. And here is the truth that can slowly loosen comparison's grip. Another person's answered prayer is not your answer being given away to someone else. God's blessings are not a limited supply that runs out when others are served first. The fact that He answered for them takes nothing from what He has stored up for you. And your appointed time is not made later by their arriving sooner. His attention to them is not His neglect of you. It is the doubt that creeps in during the silence, the questions that come in the dark. Does God even hear me? Does He care about this thing that is breaking my heart? Have I done something wrong? Is there some sin, some lack of faith, some failure in me that is blocking the answer? Is this wait a punishment? The long silence breeds these questions, and they are some of the most painful a believer can carry, because they strike at the very thing you are leaning on, making you wonder whether the God you are waiting on is even listening, even there. And the cruelest version of this doubt is the one that turns inward and starts hunting through your own life for the reason, the blockage, the secret fault that must be keeping the answer away. You replay your sins, your failures, the times your faith faltered, and you build a case against yourself. Maybe if I had prayed more, believed more, sinned less, been more faithful, the answer would have come by now. Maybe the delay is my fault. This kind of self-accusing is one of the heaviest burdens the long wait can lay on a soul, and it is almost always a lie. God's timing is not a reward dispensed to the spiritually impressive and withheld from the flawed. If it were, no one would ever receive anything, because no one's faith is flawless. The answer is not being held hostage to your performance. You cannot earn it by being good enough, and you have not forfeited it by being human. Lay down the exhausting search for your own hidden failure. The delay is almost never the punishment your guilt insists it is, and the God you are waiting on is not a stern accountant withholding your answer until you finally measure up. He is a father, and his timing flows from love and wisdom, not from displeasure with you. And it is the temptation, after so long, to simply give up, to stop praying the prayer that never gets answered, to let the hope die quietly because keeping it alive costs too much, to protect yourself from further disappointment by deciding, in a tired and wounded way, that it is just never going to happen, and you may as well stop hoping it will. That temptation is not wickedness, it is self-protection, the exhausted heart trying to stop the bleeding. But oh, I want to speak to that ember of hope tonight, before it goes out, because the story is not over, and the God you have been waiting on is not who the silence has made him seem, because the silence lies about God. When someone we love goes quiet for a long time, we begin to fill the silence with our fears, to read into it rejection, indifference, anger, all the things the absence of a voice can seem to mean. And we do the same with God. The long silence of an unanswered prayer becomes a screen onto which we project our worst fears about him, until we have constructed, out of the silence, a picture of a God who is distant, displeased, uncaring, or simply not there. But that God, the one the silence seems to reveal, is not the real God. The real God is the one who has shown us his heart, not in the silence, but in everything he has done and said, in the lengths he went to, in the cross where he proved beyond all doubt that he is for you and not against you. When the silence tells you he has grown cold, you must answer it with what you know to be true of him from everywhere else, that he is faithful, that he is love, that he gave everything for you, that he has never once abandoned one of his own. Do not let the silence rewrite the character of God. The God you are waiting on is not the distant figure the long quiet has made him seem. He is the same faithful, loving God he has always been, and his silence is not his absence, and it is certainly not his heart. Now, before I go a step further, let me say something to the loneliness of it. Because a long wait is one of the most isolating things a person can carry. The people around you cannot feel the weight of it the way you do. They forget. They move on. The thing that consumes you is, to them, an old prayer request from years ago. And so you carry it largely alone, this aching, ongoing hope, and the aloneness makes it heavier. But hear this, you are not as alone in the waiting as you feel, and you are in far better company than you know. The scriptures are not full of people whose prayers were answered instantly. They are full of people who waited, and waited long, sometimes for decades, sometimes a whole lifetime, and who are remembered now not for the speed of their answers, but for the faithfulness of their waiting. You have joined a long line of God's people who knew exactly this ache. Let me show you some of them, because their stories are for you. In fact, waiting seems to be one of the main things God does with the people He loves most. Almost no one in the Scriptures received the promise quickly. Abraham waited decades for a son. The patriarchs waited. The prophets waited and watched and longed. The people of Israel waited generations for their deliverance and waited centuries more for the Messiah they had been promised. Again and again, God makes a promise and then asks His people to wait, sometimes for an achingly long time. And He does not seem to consider the waiting a waste or a detour. He seems to consider it part of the work itself. This tells you something important about your own long wait. It does not mean you have been singled out for special hardship, or that something has gone wrong with your faith. It means you have been folded into the normal, ancient pattern of how God works with those He is shaping for something. The wait you are in is not a sign that God has overlooked you. It is, strange as it sounds, a sign that you are in the company of nearly everyone God has ever used and loved. You are not the exception. You are walking a very well-worn road, and there are footprints all along it. The footprints of the faithful who waited before you, and were not, in the end, disappointed in the God they waited for. There was a man named Abraham, and God made him a promise, a staggering one, that he would have a son, and through that son, descendants as countless as the stars. And Abraham believed God, and then he waited, and the years passed, and no son came. And more years passed, and he and his wife Sarah grew old, and then very old, well past the age when such a thing was even possible. And still no son, still only the promise, growing more absurd with every passing year. Imagine the waiting they endured, decades of it, holding on to a promise that grew more impossible the longer they held it, watching their own bodies age past any natural hope of its fulfillment. By the end, when God's messengers came and said the son would come within the year, Sarah, hidden in the tent, actually laughed, a bitter, disbelieving laugh, because the hope was so old and so impossible by then that laughter was the only response left. She had waited so long that she could no longer believe. And into that laughter, that worn-out, given up, it is too late laughter, God spoke a question that I want you to hear tonight as if it were spoken to you. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Not, has it taken a long time? It had. Not, does it look impossible now? It did. But, is it too hard for the one who made the stars? Abraham was promised to outnumber, and then God said, "At the time appointed, I will return, and Sarah shall have a son." At the time appointed. There was a set time, an appointed time, known to God, though not to them, and the long delay had not canceled the promise. It had only been waiting for that appointed time to arrive. And it did arrive. The Scripture says, with quiet and staggering faithfulness, that the Lord visited Sarah as He had said, and did unto Sarah as He had spoken. And she bore a son in her old age, at the set time of which God had spoken. At the set time. The promise that had seemed dead, that had outlived every natural hope. that had become a thing to laugh at in despair, was kept exactly at the appointed time by a God for whom nothing is too hard. Hold on to those words, the appointed time, because they hold a key to your own long wait. The delay you are enduring is not the same as a denial. God's promises have an appointed time, a set time known to Him, and the fact that it has not come yet does not mean it is not coming. It may mean only that the appointed time is not yet. The waiting between the promise and its fulfillment is not empty, is not God forgetting, is not the prayer falling on deaf ears. It is the long, often silent stretch between the promise and the appointed time. And the God who kept faith with Abraham and Sarah across all those barren years is not less faithful now. And notice something tender about how God treated Sarah's laughter, because it tells you how He treats your own worn-out doubt. When Sarah laughed that bitter, disbelieving laugh, God did not rebuke her and withdraw the promise. He did not say, "Since you laughed, since you doubted, since you could not believe after all this time, you have forfeited it." He simply asked His gentle question, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" And then He went ahead and kept the promise anyway. Sarah's faith had worn thin to the point of laughter, and God kept His word to her regardless, because the promise rested on His faithfulness, not on the strength of her belief. So hear this: if your own faith has worn thin, if you have caught yourself laughing the bitter laugh of the long disappointed, if you can barely believe anymore that the answer will come, God's faithfulness does not depend on the strength of yours. He is not waiting for you to believe perfectly before He will act. He kept His word to a woman who laughed at it, and He can keep His word to you even now, even through your doubt, even when your faith is too tired to do anything but limp. The promise was never held up by the size of your faith. It is held up by the faithfulness of your God. Let me pause here for a moment, because I know that for some of you, this long wait has worn you down to a very thin and fragile place, and the disappointment has gone deep enough that it is hard to keep going at all. If the weight of a hope that keeps not coming has begun to feel like more than you can bear, please do not carry it alone in the dark. Tell someone, a friend, a pastor, a counselor, someone who can help you hold the weight. And if the despair has grown deeper than the weight, please reach out to someone who can walk closely with you, a trusted person or a helpline in your country. You were not meant to wait all alone. If it would help, you can write one word in the comments, just the word waiting, so that you can see how many others are in this same long season tonight, holding on to prayers that have not yet been answered. You are not alone in it. Now, let me tell you about a young man who was promised a throne and how long he had to wait for it. There was a shepherd boy named David, the youngest of his brothers, so overlooked that when the prophet came to anoint the future king, his own father did not even think to call him in from the fields. But God chose him, and the prophet poured the oil over his head, and in that moment, David was anointed to be the king of Israel. The promise could not have been clearer. The throne was his. God had said so, had marked him for it. And then, what came next was not a throne. What came next was years, long years, of the opposite of a throne. He was hunted by the jealous king Saul, driven into the wilderness, hiding in caves, running for his life, sleeping in the rocks. his promised crown seeming further away with every passing year. He had the promise of a kingdom and the reality of a fugitive's life. And there were surely days in those long years of waiting when the gap between what God had said and what David was living must have seemed unbearable, when he must have wondered whether the anointing had meant anything at all. But here is what those waiting years were doing, unseen. They were making David into a king. The man who finally took the throne was not the untested boy who had been anointed. He was someone forged in the waiting, deepened by the wilderness, who had learned in the caves to depend on God, who had written in those desperate years some of the most honest prayers ever prayed, who had been given the chance to seize the throne by force and had refused, trusting God's timing rather than grabbing what was promised. The long wait was not God forgetting his promise to David. The long wait was God keeping it, the slow and hidden work of preparing the man for the promise, so that when the appointed time came, he was ready. And notice that all through those wilderness years, the anointing that had been poured over David's head did not lose its power or expire just because the throne was so long in coming. He was the anointed king the whole time he was hiding in caves. The whole time it looked as though the promise had failed. The gap between the promise and its fulfillment did not cancel the promise. It only stretched it across a long, hard season. And the same is true of whatever God has promised you, whatever assurance He has given you in His Word or planted in your heart. The fact that it has not yet come to pass does not mean it has expired. The promise is still in force, still yours, even now, in the cave, in the long stretch where it seems to have come to nothing. You may be living, right now, in the gap between the anointing and the throne. And that gap, however dark and long, is not the death of the promise. It is only the waiting for the appointed time. And it came, in God's own time, not a day too soon and not a day too late. The fugitive became the king, exactly as God had said, after all those years of waiting that had looked, from the inside, like nothing but delay. And there is something in David's choice during that long wait that speaks directly to anyone tempted to force an answer rather than wait for it. More than once in those wilderness years, David had the chance to take the throne by his own hand, to seize what God had promised rather than wait for God to give it. His enemy was delivered, on one occasion, right into his power, and the men around him urged him to strike, to end the waiting, to grab the promised crown by force. And David would not. He refused to seize with his own hands what God had promised to give in God's own time, because he understood something that the long wait had taught him, that a promise of God is best received from the hand of God, at the time of God, and not snatched ahead of schedule by our own striving. There is a lesson in that for your own waiting. The temptation, when a wait grows long, is to take matters into your own hands, to force the door, to grab some lesser version of the thing rather than keep waiting on God for the real one. But the answer seized by your own striving is rarely the answer God was preparing to give. Sometimes the most faithful thing a waiting heart can do is to keep its hands open and refuse to grab, trusting that what God gives in His time will be better than anything you could seize in yours. And to show you that this is not only ancient story, that God still keeps faith across long and painful waits, let me tell you about a man who waited longer than he lived. His name was Adoniram Judson, and he left everything to carry the gospel to Burma, a land that had never heard it. He arrived full of hope, and then he began to wait. He labored for 1 year, and no one believed. He labored for a second year, a third, a fourth, learning an impossibly difficult language, preaching, translating, pouring out his life, and still not one single person came to faith. 6 long years he labored before he saw his first convert. 6 years of sowing into what looked like solid rock, with nothing to show for it. And the waiting was not gentle. In those years, and the ones that followed, he buried his children. He lost his beloved wife. He was thrown into a horrific prison and chained near death. He had every earthly reason to conclude that his prayers and his labors had been wasted, that God had not heard, that the harvest he had waited and suffered for was never going to come. And what is most striking is that he did not wait passively, with arms folded, expecting God to do it all while he did nothing. He waited by laboring, by pouring himself out, by sowing faithfully into ground that gave nothing back, year after year, even as it cost him everything. His was not the waiting of idleness, but the waiting of faithfulness, the continuing to do the next right thing in the long absence of any visible result. And that is a model for your own wait. To wait on God is not to sit and do nothing until the answer drops from the sky. It is to keep being faithful in the place He has put you, to keep loving, keep praying, keep doing the next right thing, even when you see no fruit. The fruit of Judson's faithfulness was largely invisible to him his whole life long, and yet he kept sowing, trusting that a faithful God does not let faithful sowing come to nothing. You may see no fruit either, but keep sowing. Keep being faithful in the small, daily things, and trust that the God who reaped a vast harvest from Judson's tears is just as surely at work in the unseen ground of your own long, faithful, fruitless-looking wait. But he kept resting, as he put it, on the promises of God. He kept sowing into the silence. And here is the part that should reframe every long wait you have ever endured. The great harvest he had prayed for came, but much of it came after he had died. He did not live to see most of the fruit, but in the years after his death, the seeds he had sown into that hard ground for so long, watered with his tears and his suffering, sprang up into a harvest beyond anything he had seen in his lifetime. Hundreds of thousands of believers, one of the great Christian movements of the region, all of it growing from the faithful, waiting, weeping labor of a man who died, by the world's measure, with little to show for it. His long wait was not wasted. It was a seed in the ground, and it bore a harvest he would only see from heaven. Sometimes the answer to a long wait is bigger than the waiter and longer than a single life, and more glorious than anything the one who sowed in tears could have imagined. And there is a hard but liberating truth hidden in Judson's story, one that can set a waiting heart free. God's purposes are not confined to your timeline, and the answer to your prayer does not have to arrive within your lifetime to be real, or to be worth the waiting and the tears. We naturally measure everything by our own span, and so a wait that stretches beyond what we can see feels like failure. But God is working on a scale that outruns our years, weaving our small, faithful waiting into a story so large that we will only understand it from the far side of eternity. The mother who prays for a wayward child and dies before he turns back may yet have her prayers answered after she is gone. The faithful soul who labors and sees no fruit may be sowing a harvest that others will reap. The tears you weep into the silence are not lost. They are seeds, and God wastes none of them. And some of them will bloom in soil and seasons you cannot see from here. This does not make the waiting easy, but it does make it meaningful, because it means that even a prayer that seems to go unanswered in your lifetime is not a prayer that failed. It is a seed in the ground of a God who is never in a hurry and never wastes a thing, and who reaps, in his own vast time, every faithful tear that was ever sown. There is a promise in the Psalms made for exactly people like Judson, and like you. Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. He that goes forth weeping, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. The weeping and the sowing come first, the long season of planting into hard ground with nothing to show but your tears. But the promise is that the harvest comes, that the one who went out weeping comes back rejoicing, arms full of the very thing they once wept over. Your tears in the long wait are not a sign of failure. The scripture calls them the sowing of precious seed. They are part of the planting, watering the ground where the answer is growing unseen. And the promise stands over them, ancient and sure, that the season of weeping and sowing is not the end of the story, that joy comes in the reaping, that those who go out weeping into the long wait do, in God's time, come home rejoicing. Hold that promise tonight. Your tears are seed. The reaping is coming. The weeping endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. So let me tell you what is actually true about the long wait, the thing all these lives are pointing to. There is a word God gave through the prophet Habakkuk to people weary of waiting, and it says this: "The vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Though it tarry, wait for it." God himself acknowledges that his promises sometimes tarry, sometimes take long, longer than we can understand. He does not pretend the wait is short or easy, but he says the vision has an appointed time, and though it tarries, it will surely come. The tarrying is not the same as the failing. A promise of God that is delayed is not a promise of God that is broken. It is a promise waiting for its appointed time, a time set by a wisdom you cannot see, and it will not, in the end, be late, because God is never late, however slow he seems from inside the waiting. We measure time by our own urgency, by how much we want the thing and how long we have wanted it. And by that measure, God almost always seems slow, because our wanting is so immediate and his timing is so patient. But God is not working to the clock of our impatience. He is working to the clock of his perfect wisdom, which takes into account countless things we cannot see, and which is aimed not at relieving our discomfort as quickly as possible, but at bringing about the fullest and deepest good. From inside our urgency, that patience can feel like neglect, but it is not slowness, it is precision. God is not late, and he is not early. He acts at exactly the right moment, the one a wisdom far beyond ours has appointed, when the good he is working toward will be most complete. He has never once, in all of history, been late to keep a promise, and He will not start with yours. And here is what the waiting is doing. Even when it feels like nothing is happening, it is never empty. In the long silence between the prayer and the answer, God is at work in ways you cannot see. The way a seed works invisibly in the dark soil long before any green appears above the ground. He is working on the thing you are waiting for, in ways hidden from you. And He is working on you, shaping you in the waiting as He shaped David in the caves, growing a depth and a trust and a character in you that only the waiting could produce, that would never have grown if the answer had come quickly. The wait is not God doing nothing. It is God doing 1,000 things you cannot see, in you and around you, preparing both you and the answer for the appointed time when they will finally meet. Think of all that has to come together for a single answered prayer. All the circumstances and the people and the timing that must align, much of it entirely outside your sight and your control. When you pray for a wandering loved one to come home, there may be a long, slow work going on in their heart that you cannot see, a softening that cannot be rushed, a chain of experiences God is using that is not finished unfolding. When you pray for a door to open, there may be 100 things that must fall into place first, things being arranged in the lives of other people, in places and ways you will never know about until you look back. The wait that feels like God ignoring you may in fact be God orchestrating, patiently, across many lives and many circumstances, the conditions for an answer that will be far better and far more complete than a hasty one could ever have been. You see only your own small corner and your own unanswered prayer. God sees the whole vast loom, and He is weaving, thread by patient thread, something whose pattern you cannot yet make out. The delay is not neglect. It is the time it takes for a wise and loving God to prepare an answer worth waiting for. So let me speak now to the lies that the long wait has been whispering to you in the dark. It tells you that God has forgotten you, that your prayer slipped through the cracks, that you have been overlooked while He attends to everyone else. But God does not forget. He kept faith with Abraham across decades, with David across years in the wilderness, with Judson across a lifetime and beyond. He has never once lost track of a single prayer or a single waiting child. Your prayer is not forgotten. It is held, known, attended to, kept before Him every moment, even through the longest silence. The God who counts the stars and numbers the hairs of your head has not misplaced the longing of your heart. He knows exactly what you are waiting for, and exactly how long you have waited, and He has not forgotten you for 1 second of it. There is a moment in the Scriptures where God's people cried out that He had forgotten them, that He had forsaken them, and God answered with one of the tenderest things He ever said. Can a woman forget the child she nursed? Can she have no compassion on the son of her womb? And then He says, even if she could forget, even that, I will not forget you. And then He says the most astonishing thing of all. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Engraved. Not written in pencil to be erased, not jotted on a list to be misplaced, but carved into His very hands, permanent, always before Him, impossible to overlook. That is how forgotten you are by God. Not at all, not ever, not for an instant. You are engraved on the hands of the one you are waiting on, held before His face every moment, and the feeling that He has forgotten you is one of the cruelest illusions of the long wait and one of the furthest from the truth. He has not forgotten you. He cannot. Your name is carved into his hands. It tells you that your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling, that no one is hearing, that you are speaking into an empty sky. But the silence is not absence. God hears every prayer the moment it is prayed, even the ones that seem to vanish into nothing. Even the weary, worn-out ones you can barely lift anymore. The absence of an immediate answer is not the absence of a hearing. Your prayers have all been heard, every one, gathered up and kept by a God who is listening far more closely than the silence makes it seem. And not one of them has been wasted or lost. The scriptures give us an astonishing picture of this. They speak of the prayers of God's people being gathered and kept before his throne, treasured, like incense rising, like something precious collected and held. Not one prayer evaporates, not one disappears unheard into an empty sky. Every prayer you have ever prayed in the long wait, including the weary ones, the doubting ones, the ones you barely got out through tears, has been received and kept and treasured by God, held before him, not one of them lost. You may feel as though you have been pouring your prayers into a void all these years, that they have simply vanished. But nothing could be further from the truth. They have been gathered, every one, and they are before God now. And the silence you have heard in return is not the silence of a God who did not receive them. It is the silence of a God who received every one and is answering on a timetable you cannot see. Your years of prayer are not gone. They are kept, and they are precious, and they are part of what God is weaving toward the answer at the appointed time. It tells you that the wait is a punishment, that you must have done something wrong, that the delay is God's displeasure with you. But the long waits of the scriptures did not fall on the faithless and the wicked. They fell on Abraham, the friend of God, on David, the man after God's own heart, on Judson, who gave his whole life to Christ. The most faithful people in the Bible were often the ones who waited the longest. A long wait is not a verdict on your worth or a sign of God's anger. It is, very often, the portion of those God is doing the deepest work in. And it is not punishment. It is, however hard it is to believe, a strange form of love, the patience of a God who is preparing something better than a quick and shallow answer. Think of how a wise parent does not give a child everything the moment it is asked for, not out of cruelty, but out of love, because the parent can see what the child cannot, the right timing, the fuller good, the things the child is not yet ready to receive. A loving parent's "not yet" is not a withdrawal of love. It is love operating at a depth the child cannot yet understand. And the child, who can only feel the frustration of the delay, often misreads that wisdom as indifference. So it is with you and God. From inside the wait, the delay feels like neglect, like a withholding that must mean something is wrong. But from God's vantage, the timing may be the very shape His love is taking. The patient holding back of a good thing until the better time has come. You are not being treated harshly. You are being loved by a Father wise enough to give the best thing at the best time, rather than a lesser thing in a hurry. And it tells you that it is never going to come. That the answer is simply not coming, and you may as well give up. But you cannot see the appointed time, and neither can your weariness. The answer that feels impossibly far may be nearer than you know, or it may come in a form you did not expect, or it may, like Judson's harvest, be growing in ways that will outlast and overflow your own life. What you cannot conclude from inside the waiting is that it will never come, because you do not have the vantage point to say that. Only God knows the appointed time, and the fact that it has not come yet is not evidence that it never will. The dawn always feels furthest away in the last dark hour before it breaks. And think how many times, even in the long history of God's people, the answer came precisely when all hope seemed gone. At the 11th hour, in the moment after everyone had given up. The promised child came to Abraham and Sarah only when it had become utterly impossible, when they were far too old, when laughter was the only response left. So often, that is exactly when God moves. Not in the comfortable early days, when the answer would have cost us no faith, but in the final dark, when we have exhausted every other hope and have nothing left but Him. Your sense that it is too late, that it has gone on too long, that the door must be closed by now, is not the reliable signal it feels like. It may, in fact, be the very thing that comes right before the dawn. Because God seems to delight in answering at the moment that displays most clearly that it was Him and not us, that the thing was beyond all human possibility and came as pure gift. The lateness you feel is not proof the answer is dead. It may be the darkness that comes just before the light. So what do you do in a long wait that has worn you thin? A few gentle things for waiting without breaking. Keep bringing the prayer, even wearily, even when the fire is gone. You do not have to pray it with great feeling or perfect faith. You have only to keep bringing it, the way a child keeps coming back to a parent with the same request, trusting they are heard even when the answer waits. Persistence in prayer is not nagging God. It is the posture of a heart that keeps trusting through the delay. Jesus Himself told a story on purpose to encourage exactly this, about someone who kept asking and would not give up until the answer came. And the Scripture says plainly why He told it, so that we would always pray and not lose heart. Always pray and do not lose heart. He knew the great temptation in a long wait is to stop, to let the prayer die, to conclude there is no use in asking anymore. And against that temptation He set this story, almost as a command. Keep asking, keep coming, do not give up. So your continued praying, after all these years, is not you wearing God down or pestering Him into action. It is you doing the very thing Jesus told you to do. Refusing to lose heart. Holding your ground in hope against the pull of despair. Every time you pray the prayer again, instead of giving up, you are obeying Him, choosing hope over surrender one more time. And that quiet persistence is precious to God and is itself a kind of victory, whether or not the answer has yet come. So keep praying your worn, smooth prayer. It is not falling on deaf ears, and the keeping on itself is a quiet act of faith more precious to God than you know. And do not measure the value of your prayers by how they feel. In a long wait, prayer often stops feeling powerful or even meaningful. It can feel like talking into the dark, like going through motions, like a duty you perform out of stubbornness rather than a living conversation. But the feeling of a prayer is not the measure of it. The weary, half-believing prayer dragged up out of a tired heart may be more precious in God's sight than the easy, fervent prayer of an untested faith, because it costs more. because it is offered in the dark without the encouragement of feeling, as a pure act of trust. When you keep praying, even though it feels like nothing, you are saying to God, with your persistence, I still believe you are there. I still believe you hear, even though everything in me feels otherwise. And that is one of the purest forms of faith there is. So do not despise your dry, weary prayers. Do not stop because they feel empty. The God who hears is not listening for eloquence or fervor. He is listening for the heart of a child who keeps coming, and yours keeps coming. And that faithfulness in the dark is beautiful to him beyond anything you can feel. And be honest with God about the waiting, including the hard parts. You do not have to pretend you are not weary, not doubting, not tempted to give up. The scriptures are full of God's people crying out, "How long, O Lord, how long?" That very question, flung up out of the ache of waiting, is in the Bible, prayed by people God loved. So bring him your honest weariness, your frustration, your near despair. He can hold all of it, and he would far rather have your honest lament than a brave silence. Tell him how long it has been. Tell him you are tired. That honesty is not the opposite of faith. It is faith, refusing to let go even while it aches. Some of the most faithful people in the scriptures prayed prayers that would shock us with their bluntness, crying out to God, "Why have you forgotten me? Why do you stand far off? Will you forget me forever? How long?" These were not faithless complaints. They were the honest cries of people who trusted God enough to tell him exactly how they felt. And God preserved their words in his book as a kind of permission, a model for the rest of us. So you do not have to dress up your prayers in polite, patient language you do not feel. You can tell God that you are angry, that you are confused, that this is taking too long, that it feels like he has forgotten you, that you are close to giving up. None of that will offend him or drive him away. A relationship that can hold honest anguish is far deeper and far more real than one that only permits pleasant words. And God wants the real you, the whole aching truth of you, not a performance of serenity. Pour it out, all of it. The lament, the questions, the near despair, that kind of raw honesty, far from being a failure of faith, is often the very thing that keeps a weight from hardening into bitterness, because it keeps the conversation open, keeps you turned toward God rather than away from him, even in the worst of it. Look for what God may be doing in you during the wait, and let the waiting do its work rather than only resisting it. Ask not only, when will this end, but what are you growing in me here? What depth, what trust, what compassion, what dependence is being formed in this wilderness that could be formed nowhere else? The wait that you can only experience as delay may be, underneath, the most important work God is doing in your whole life. And learning to see it that way can turn the waiting from pure torment into something with meaning, even before the answer comes. Look back, even over the seasons of waiting you have already survived, and you may begin to see it. The hard waits of your past, the ones that felt unbearable while you were in them, very often turn out, in hindsight, to have been the seasons that grew you the most, that deepened your faith, that taught you to lean on God in ways the easy times never could. The person you are now was shaped, in part, by the weights you once thought you could not endure. And that pattern is almost certainly at work in this wait too, even though you cannot see it yet from the inside. One day, you may look back on this very season, the one that feels like nothing but barren delay, and recognize it as the soil in which something deep and good was growing in you all along. You will likely not be able to see it now. The meaning of a wait is usually only visible from the far side of it. But you can trust, even now, that the God who has never wasted one of your past waits is not wasting this one either. And that the very season that feels most empty may be doing the most important work of your life. And hold the answer loosely while you hold God tightly. The deepest danger of a long wait is that the thing you are waiting for can become larger in your heart than the God you are waiting on, until your whole faith hangs on whether you get it. But God Himself is the treasure, not merely the giver of the treasure. And a heart that learns to rest in Him, to find Him enough even in the not yet, has found something the answer alone could never give. Trust the giver more than the gift. Then, whatever comes and whenever it comes, you will have the one thing that can never be taken, the God who has been with you in every moment of the long wait, who is Himself the deepest answer to the deepest longing underneath all your other longings. And there is a quiet freedom that comes when the giver becomes more precious to you than the gift, a freedom the answer alone could never have given. The person whose whole peace depends on getting the specific thing is at the mercy of whether it comes. But the person who has learned, in the long wait, to find God Himself enough, has come into a security that no delay can shake and no disappointment can destroy. This does not mean you stop wanting the thing or stop praying for it. It means the wanting no longer rules you, because underneath it, you have found something steadier, the presence of God Himself, who was always the truest thing you were longing for, even when you thought it was the gift. Many people look back from the far side of a long wait and say that they would not trade what they found of God in the waiting for an easier, quicker answer. That the wait, as painful as it was, drew them into a depth with God they would never have reached any other way. That is the strange gift hidden in the hardest waits, that in losing the comfort of a quick answer, you can gain the far greater treasure of God Himself, and come to know Him as the one who is enough, even in the not yet. Let me leave you with this, and then I will let you go gently into your night. Somewhere out of sight, in the dark soil, a seed that was planted long ago is doing its slow and silent work. From the surface, the ground looks exactly as barren as it did the day the seed went in. Nothing shows, nothing moves, and you could be forgiven for thinking nothing is happening at all. But under the surface, in the hidden dark, the seed is at work, swelling, breaking open, sending down roots, doing everything it must do before the day, the appointed day, when the first green finally breaks through into the light. Your long wait is that hidden season. From the surface, it looks like nothing is happening, like the prayer fell into barren ground and died. But the God who kept His word to Abraham at the set time, who brought David from the cave to the throne in His own hours, who grew from Judson's tears a harvest he never lived to see, that God is at work in the hidden dark of your waiting. And the ground is not as barren as it looks. The dawn that feels like it will never come has never once failed to come. The night has never, in all of history, won. So hold on, weary one, through this last dark stretch of the waiting. Keep the small ember of hope alive a little longer. And if you cannot manage hope tonight, if the most you can do is simply not let go, then do that. Just hold on. Just stay. Just keep your tired hand in His, because that is enough. Survival in the dark is its own kind of faith, and the dawn does not require you to feel it coming in order to come. You do not have to wait well, or wait with a brave face, or wait without tears. You have only to wait, to keep showing up to a God who has not gone anywhere, to refuse to finally let go of the rope even when your grip is weak and your arms are tired. Your prayer has been heard. Your wait is not wasted. Your God has not forgotten. And at the appointed time, in a way and a moment you cannot yet see, the seed in the dark will break into the light. Rest now. The one you are waiting for is also in love, waiting for the perfect time to answer, and He is never, ever late.